Welcome to Janome Live. I'm Susan Enderson, and today I'm presenting the buttonhole foot, the stabilizer plate, how to mark buttonholes, and creating welted and programmable buttonholes. When spacing my buttonholes, I've always used a hem gauge. You can take the paper template from your pattern and slide the gauge along between the distance for the buttonholes, like so, and then mark the centers. That'll get you started with your buttonholes. But my favorite way to do it is with my expanding gauge. This is a kind of a scissor gauge. It also works well for marking pleats and so forth on your fabrics. But what I like to do with this is I can mark all my buttonholes at one time as far as I need to go, and then I just mark each space as needed. I also have in the center here, you have a line here where you can draw in the center and get the line exactly the length you need for each button. Now to create a programmable buttonhole, I'm going to use stitch pattern number 2, and you'll notice here my indicator has changed. I'm now going to be using the reverse button for when I've reached the length and I want it to reverse back. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start the stitching. Faster. And it's going to satin stitch backwards. I'm going to hit the reverse. It's going to straight stitch forward. The reverse. It's going to straight stitch forward. I have to hit my reverse again when it comes down to the beginning. And here's where you've got to watch and be close, so when it gets back to the very end, I have to hit my reverse again.
This process allows you a couple of options. Number one, if you don't have a button and you want to make a buttonhole at a determined length, you can do that by recording it. You can also use this if you're making just a hole in an item, project, garment, or whatever that you wish to use for like a ribbon to run through, or if you wanted to use it to hang like on a shower curtain.
But that's your memory buttonhole.
I also like to use the programmable buttonhole when stitching on quilted projects. It just makes that buttonhole that much nicer. Here's another quick tip about your buttonhole foot. The very front of the buttonhole foot, before the slide, if you place that on the edge of your fabric, it's the perfect distance, according to most patterns, for your buttonhole to be positioned from the edge. You'll want to use a keyhole buttonhole. Any one of the ones shown on the screen work well whenever you have a shank button, like for a coat, menswear, and so forth, that requires that little extra depth, and the keyhole allows for that shank at the very beginning of the buttonhole. Keyhole buttonholes do require an awl or round cutter to cut out the actual hole, and then the blade cutter to finish off the buttonhole.
When working a knit buttonhole, I'm going to just touch buttonhole, and you have optional knits right here. You've got a double cross, and you've got just an open, and then a standard for reinforced. I use this one for jeans, but if you're just using a buttonhole for knits, you can see where it's double cross. It's to hopefully keep the buttonhole from stretching while it's in use. For my setup, I've got, this is a lightweight t-shirt knit. I still have my interfacing to the wrong side, and I've got my washout on top. This is vital for knit buttonholes. And I've got my stabilizer plate on. I would not recommend trying to do a buttonhole without a stabilizer plate. You may also, and we always test sew our buttonholes on a sample before we actually put it on a project, but you may want to use a washout underneath as well, just to keep that knit from balling up or stretching while it's being sewn. The stabilizer plate actually takes care of 90% of that, which is really great, because that way I don't have to use stabilizer and guess what I'm doing might be incorrect. To do a nut buttonhole, we're still going to be using our buttonhole lever. That makes sure that that's down. And then we're just going to sew. Again, I'm using a contrasting thread so that you can see the buttonhole. And this time it's doing a crossover stitch. You could also do this as a corded buttonhole, which I showed in another video. And there is my knit buttonhole. All finished. There is my knit buttonhole, and all I have to do is open it up. But you can see how that's going to give me that beautiful stitching regardless of where I've put this. But that's for doing on knits. To do a welt buttonhole, you're still going to need your base fabric, stabilized again, and you will need a separate piece of fabric. Now I'm using two different colored fabrics today to make it easier for you to see. Normally you would do matching fabrics. At your machine, you're going to choose pattern number 13. And again, because of demonstrating purposes, I'm going to increase my width so it's a little easier for you to see. So I've taken it up to 6.8. 5 is the standard. Now, placing right sides together, I'm going to place this into my presser foot on top of the stitch plate, the stabilizer plate, okay, but underneath the presser foot. And choose number 13, and again change the stitch width to 6.8, and we're just going to run the machine. This is going to just give me a straight stitch outline. And I'll show it to you when it's done here. And I just have a what appears to be a box. It's like, okay, what do you do with the box? Well, just like so. And when I get up here to the corners, I'm not going to slice through all the way to the end. I'm going to slice into the corner. So I'm going to make this like a little triangle out of the point where I turn it, just like you were clipping a normal curve. You can see how that's going to go, just have that little tiny triangle there. And we're going to do it on the same on the other end. That little triangle is going to become important. Right now, it's just there. Okay, so as you can see, I have sliced open my buttonhole and cut into the corners. Now I'm going to take my piece and put it through the hole, like so, to turn it right side out. This is a great buttonhole for a more couture look on women's jackets, men's jackets, anything like that. It's perfect for that kind of work. You're not going to see it in bridals necessarily, but you will see it in the couture work. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this to the iron and press that flat. So here is my buttonhole pressed flat, and I've got a couple more steps to go, but I wanted to show you this is the first step. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to fold it forward and back. Usually you get the piece that you've clipped in there gives you just the right amount of how much you're supposed to fold over, and it happens to be about half that opening. And same thing with the bottom piece here. We're going to do both of them so they cover about half of that opening. So I'm just going to crease this with my finger right now, fold the next one over and crease that with my finger and take it to the ironing board. So after you've pressed that folded edge, this is what I get. There's my buttonhole. Now it's not quite done. It's already open, but it's not done. It's not stitched flat. So I'm going to remove my buttonhole foot and go back to my open toe foot so that I can see what I'm doing, and go back to a straight stitch. So here at my panel, I'm just going to go back to page number 1 and leave it at the straight stitch pattern number 1. Flip it back again. So at this point, I'm going to fold up my fabric so I can see that little triangle that we left initially, and the folded fabric ends back over here, make those a little more square, and I'm going to stitch right through that little line that's there, that where my regular stitching was to begin with. So again, I just have number 1 pattern selected, and we're just going to, I love that little thumb wheel, and we're just going to slowly stitch through all those layers with that triangle to lock all that folding down. Reverse back through it. It's right along the fold. I'm not going through the fold. I'm going along the fold and trim. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Fold the fabric back out of the way. Do it this way instead. Fold the fabric back out of the way, making sure I can find my little triangle. There's my little triangle. And have my fold fabrics here. And again, stitch right on that line. You're not going through the fold, you're just going through the triangle and the folded fabric that made or covered up that hole that you created in step 1. After you've done that, you can trim this away. You don't need all that extra. And there's your welted buttonhole. Makes it a really nice technique when you're going to do, like I said, great for tailored garments, men's attire, and so forth. Thanks for joining me today. Remember to check with your dealer for any of the machines, items, or accessories shown in today's video. I'm Susan Enderson, and I'll look for you next time on Janome Live.